문화유산이라 할 수 있죠.
널 알게 된 순간부터 내 머릿속엔 온통 너뿐이야. 항상 널 웃게 해줄게. 오랫동안 느껴왔어.
한국 바로 알리기 여러분도 함께 해주세요.
떨어지는 우리 딱 알겠어.
Held its first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
Team Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the Status UN summit.
A massive drone attack on Ukraine overnight on Monday and Tuesday.
Arirang.
In our headlines on this Friday, May 8th, here in South Korea, a South Korean team is in the UAE to confirm the cause of an explosion and fire on a cargo carrier operated by South Korea in the Strait of Hormuz as U.S. and Iranian forces trade fire on Thursday amid their fragile ceasefire. And South Korea's current account remained in the black for 35 months in a row in March, with a record monthly surplus of over 37 billion US dollars, driven by information technology products. Meanwhile, the U.S. Court of International Trade rules illegal the Trump administration's 10% across-the-board tariffs in a second blow to its signature economic policy. A South Korean team is in the UAE to confirm the cause of a detonation and ensuing fire on a cargo carrier operated by South Korea in the Strait of Hormuz. Our Cho Young-eun reports.
A cargo vessel operated by South Korean shipping company HMM, damaged by an onboard explosion and fire near the Strait of Hormuz, arrived at Dry Docks Wharf Dubai, the Middle East's largest ship repair facility, on Friday. According to HMM and local officials, the vessel was towed from waters near Al Quain in the United Arab Emirates and reached the Dubai port area shortly after midnight Thursday, roughly 12 hours after towing operations began. South Korean authorities are preparing to launch a full-scale investigation into the incident, with on-site inspections expected to begin as early as Friday afternoon. A South Korean government team comprising investigators from the Korean Maritime Safety Tribunal and forensic fire experts from the National Fire Agency is expected to conduct a probe. Investigators are looking into whether the explosion and fire were caused by an external attack, including the possibility of an Iranian involvement, or by an internal issue such as a mechanical defect aboard the vessel. The authorities said there have so far been no signs of hull damage consistent with a military strike, and the ship was reportedly neither listing nor taking on water following the incident. Meanwhile, a senior Iranian lawmaker denied Tehran's involvement during video talks on Thursday with South Korean lawmaker Kim Seok-gi. According to Kim, Iranian Parliament Committee Chairman Ibrahim Azizi said that if Iran had attacked a Korean vessel, the government or military would have officially announced it. South Korea's foreign ministry also declined to comment directly on Iranian media reports, saying establishing the facts and determining the exact cause of the incident remained the government's top priority. 조영은, Arirang News.
Staying in the Middle East, the U.S. and Iran traded fire on Thursday, with both sides blaming the other for the military confrontation. Our Kim Bo-kyung has the latest.
The U.S. military carried out airstrikes on Iran's Qeshm port and Bandar Abbas on Thursday local time, according to Fox News, citing a senior official. Iran's semi-official Mehr news agency had reported earlier that explosions were heard around Qeshm Island near the Strait of Hormuz and in Bandar Abbas in southern Iran. Iran, meanwhile, accused the U.S. of violating the ceasefire by targeting two ships. According to Iran's IRIB broadcaster, a spokesperson for Iran's Qeshm Anbiya Central Headquarters said Washington targeted two ships in the Strait of Hormuz and that enemy forces were hit by Iranian missile attacks and retreated.
Following these reports, an informed military official said that after the aggressive U.S. military targeted an Iranian oil tanker, hostile enemy units in the area of the Strait of Hormuz came under Iranian missile fire and, after sustaining damage, were forced to flee.
The fact that the two sides exchanged fire was confirmed, with U.S. Central Command saying that American forces intercepted unprovoked Iranian attacks and responded with self-defense strikes as U.S. Navy-guided missile destroyers transited the Strait of Hormuz toward the Gulf of Oman. In the statement, it said the U.S. eliminated inbound threats and targeted Iranian military facilities responsible for attacking U.S. forces, including missile and drone launch sites. It added that the Central Command does not seek escalation, but remains positioned and ready to protect American forces. U.S. President Donald Trump also confirmed the strikes on social media, saying that American destroyers were not damaged, but great damage was done to Iranian attackers. He told ABC News that the latest strike was just a light warning and that the ceasefire remains in effect. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Here in the local front, South Korea's current account remained in the black for 35 months in a row in March, with a record monthly surplus of over $37 billion. Our business correspondent Park Chun-han covers the latest numbers.
Korea's current account surplus reached a record high in March, fueled by a surge in exports of information technology products such as semiconductors and computer peripherals. According to preliminary data from the Bank of Korea on Friday, the country's current account recorded a surplus of $37.33 billion in March. This is the largest monthly surplus ever recorded, which is up 289.7% year-on-year and 61% higher than February, which was the previous record monthly high. As a result, the account surplus in March recorded its 35th consecutive month in the black. The goods account alone posted a surplus of $35.07 billion as exports jumped nearly 57% compared to a year earlier to over $94 billion. The historic performance was almost entirely driven by a super rally in the information technology sector. Semiconductor exports skyrocketed by nearly 150%, while shipments of information and communication devices grew by 78.1%. Regionally, exports to Southeast Asia and China saw massive growth of over 60%. However, exports to the Middle East plunged by over 49% amid ongoing regional instability. While exports saw an unprecedented monthly high, the financial account signaled a major shift in investor sentiment. Foreign investors pulled a record $29.33 billion out of the Korean stock market in March. March's massive outflow came as foreign investors locked in profits from Korea's strong tech-driven rally. The selling pressure especially intensified as heightened geopolitical risks weighed on investor sentiment. As Korea's IT sector continues to dominate global semiconductor markets, the challenge remains for the economy to maintain this momentum while navigating volatile foreign investment and shifting global conditions. 박준환, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, a U.S. trade court on Thursday ruled illegal the Trump administration's 10% global tariffs. Now, these tariffs had gone into effect back in February after the U.S. Supreme Court ruled illegal the so-called Liberation Day tariffs. Our economics correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
A U.S. federal trade court has ruled that President Donald Trump exceeded his authority by imposing a 10% global tariff on imported goods. In a 2-1 decision issued on Thursday local time, the Court of International Trade invalidated the administration's use of Section 122 of the Trade Act and that it was not intended to address the types of trade deficits cited by Trump. The businesses argued the tariffs were an attempt to bypass a Supreme Court ruling that struck down Trump's 2025 tariffs imposed under emergency economic powers. The legal challenge follows months of friction over the administration's use of executive authority to bypass congressional oversight on trade policy. After the Supreme Court struck down an initial tariff round in February, the White House immediately invoked Section 122, citing a $1.2 trillion trade deficit recorded in 2024. Also, according to the Wall Street Journal, his latest ruling could set a significant precedent for more than 3,000 pending lawsuits seeking $166 billion in refunds for previously collected duties. While the trade court ordered the government to refund tariffs paid by the specific plaintiffs with interest, it declined to issue a nationwide injunction. This means the ruling does not provide immediate relief to all importers. In the meantime, the 10% tariffs are scheduled to expire in July anyway, at which point the White House plans to transition to Section 301 of the Trade Act to target what it describes as unfair trade practices and excess industrial capacity. Responding to the ruling, the Blue House said on Friday local time that Korea will continue to closely monitor related developments while seeking to maintain a balance of interests under its current tariff deal with the U.S. An official noted that the ruling currently applies only to specific plaintiffs and pointed out that Section 122 tariffs are limited by law to maximum of 150 days. The Trump administration is expected to appeal the decision. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
The leaders of the U.S. and China are slated to sit down in Beijing late next week, and among the many issues on their agenda is that relate to a possible partnership on artificial intelligence. Our Ian Jin explains.
The leaders of the United States and China are set to meet next week. And according to the Wall Street Journal, citing people familiar with the matter, Washington and Beijing are weighing the launch of official discussions about artificial intelligence. This comes at a time when risks posed by AI are more threatening than ever. AI systems behaving unexpectedly, autonomous military systems, or even potential attacks from non-state actors using powerful open-source tools. Putting official discussions on AI on the summit agenda would call for the two countries to manage the strategic stability of the very technology that the two sides are in a race to outcompete. This would be the second time that the topic of AI discussions has reached the presidential level, following previous engagement between former President Joe Biden and Xi Jinping in November of 2023. Experts and former administration aides have pointed out that while discussions to establish an AI hotline for communication at the leadership level have great value, historically, China has not used the crisis channels that the two countries already maintain. Rather than an alliance, the U.S. and China would need to prioritize AI safety and stability. New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman said the Trump-Xi summit next week could be the most significant encounter between American and Chinese leaders since Richard Nixon met Mao Zedong in Beijing in 1972. The two countries were able to land a tacit alliance against the Soviet Union, a common foe, which now is artificial intelligence. Separately, on Thursday, former U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell was asked during a press meeting whether the upcoming summit would include efforts on North Korean issues, including the return of Trump's personal diplomacy with Kim Jong-un. Saying that it was a likely topic to be on the table, Campbell said Trump may ask Xi for suggestions on engaging with Kim. However, he also pointed out that the North's diplomatic and military standing has changed since the last Trump-Kim meeting, expressing skepticism as to whether Pyongyang would be interested in dialogue with Washington. 이은진, Arirang News.
Come Saturday, that is May 9th, the European Union celebrates Europe Day for peace and solidarity within the continent. In light of this occasion, our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young reached out to the EU ambassador to South Korea for his thoughts on broader partnership with Seoul. Do take a listen.
As global crises expose new vulnerabilities, South Korea and the European Union are building up a more resilient partnership.
This is the second energy crisis we are experiencing in the span of only a few years. The first one for Europe, it was in the wake of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Then we had to wean ourselves off oil and gas from Russia. But now, only a few years later, we see again our vulnerability vis-à-vis fossil fuel.
Speaking to Arirang News ahead of Europe Day, EU Ambassador to Korea Ugo Astuto said recent crises highlight the need to accelerate the transition toward greener and more resilient economies. A leading diplomatic advocate in Seoul for making the green transition, Astuto said Korea and Europe are already closely cooperating with their green and digital partnerships launched in 2023.
On the one hand, for instance, in the multilateral scene, with the climate negotiation. And then bilaterally, focusing on some sectors that can be particularly promising. Let me mention batteries, where Korea is a major champion worldwide. Offshore wind, where the European Union can bring considerable expertise. Or the defining of the emission trading systems.
Economic security is another joint concern. Last month, the European Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security visited Seoul, launching a new strategic dialogue on trade, supply chains and technology.
We need to look at our vulnerabilities. We mentioned earlier energy. There are others, rare earth, just to mention one. And we need to look together how best to address these vulnerabilities, how to mitigate our dependencies, and how to foster our strategic autonomy.
This year marks the 76th anniversary of the Schuman Declaration, which laid the foundations for the EU after World War II, growing from 6 members in the 1950s to 27 countries and roughly 450 million people today.
The European Union is a project of peace. It's a project founded in respect for the rule of law, in respect for human rights, for international law, in the fact that might does not make right. And these are principles which are all the more relevant today, at least as relevant today as they were in the 1950s, as we face a more and more erratic world scenario where we see a return to imperial wars in Europe emanating from Russia. So we need to make it clear again our belief in these principles and values which can work for the global common good.
Shared principles, he said, are drawing Korea and the EU closer together as like-minded democracies facing common challenges. He hopes to see a Korea-EU summit further expand the strategic partnership. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Thank you very much.
The National Assembly has halted its plans to reintroduce its constitutional reform bill during Friday's plenary session for a vote. The halt comes in response to threats of a filibuster by the main opposition People Power Party. The Blue House, for its part, shared regret through a statement and urged lawmakers to continue efforts to bridge the gap over their differences. An earlier vote on the constitutional reform bill back on Thursday was declared invalid in the absence of a quorum as the PPP condemned the bill as rushed. The bill, however, is backed by 6 parties, including the ruling Democratic Party, and seeks to strengthen safeguards against martial law declarations. The leaders of South Korea and Canada discussed ways to deepen bilateral ties during talks on the phone on this Friday. According to senior Blue House spokesperson Kang Yoo-jung, President Lee Jae-myung expressed hopes for productive partnership in areas such as security and energy, and these hopes were shared by Prime Minister Mark Carney. They also agreed to work together to support a peaceful resolution to the situation in the Middle East and ensure freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. The call came as South Korea and Germany compete for a multi-billion-dollar submarine deal with Canada. The preferred bidder is expected to be announced next month. And President Lee Jae-myung marked Parents' Day on this Friday with solemn words of comfort to the parents of firefighters and police officers who lost their lives in the line of duty.
사랑하는 자식을 먼저 떠나보내야 했던 그 슬픔 앞에서 어떤 말로도 위로를 다할 수 없음을 잘 압니다. 마지막까지 소임을 다했을 그 젊은 청년들의 숭고한 희생을 무겁게 기억하겠습니다.
These words were shared during a related ceremony hosted by the Korean Senior Citizens Association earlier this morning. The President and First Lady Kim Hye-kyung also took time to engage in a gesture of gratitude common during Parents' Day here, that is the pinning of carnations on parents by their children. The Culture Ministry and the Korean Film Council will distribute over 2 million coupons that offer a discount of 6,000 won off movie tickets. The coupons will be available from next Wednesday, that is May 13th. They can be used at major cinema chains, including CGV, Lotte Cinema, Megabox and CineQ, with up to 2 coupons per person through each movie theater's app or website. And on designated Culture Day Wednesdays, movie tickets could cost as low as 4,000 won. A second distribution of such movie coupons will take place in July. Be careful what you wish for. These are the words of wisdom that come to mind when watching the latest K-horror series on Netflix, If Wishes Could Kill, which has been receiving rave reviews. Our culture correspondent Park Konu had the pleasure of sitting down with one of the lead actors.
A wish granted, but at the cost of your life. That's the chilling premise behind Netflix's latest Korean horror hit Kirigo, or If Wishes Could Kill, which climbed to the top of the platform's global non-English TV chart the second week after release.
우선 기리고가 지금 넷플릭스 1위를 차지했는데요. 먼저 너무 축하드리고요. 1위를 딱 처음 하셨을 때 어떤 기분이셨나요?
When I woke up, my phone was flooded with congratulatory messages. I felt incredibly happy and thought to myself, wow, so this is what this kind of feeling is like.
One of the standout factors behind the series' success is its cast, which is largely made up of rising actors, including Hyun Woo-seok. Hard work behind the scenes became one of the driving forces behind the show's popularity.
Since this was such a major production, I initially felt huge pressure, but was able to overcome it thanks to the support of my fellow actors and the staff. I even arrived early on set to study coding with my teacher, which helped make my performance more convincing.
One critic said the appeal of new faces may have resonated even more strongly because the series was released on a streaming platform.
The new faces helped maintain viewer immersion, while the strong storytelling kept audiences engaged. Unlike theaters, streaming series rely less on star power and more on the quality of the story and acting.
Insiders also say the uniquely Korean horror elements have resonated with global audiences.
Factors like shamans gave the series its own distinct identity, and I think that became one of its biggest strengths. Of course, horror is about fear and jump scares, but beyond that, viewers also connected with the characters' relationships and chemistry.
The series combines traditional Korean shamanism with modern digital devices to create fear in a very contemporary way. The idea of making wishes through a smartphone app in exchange for death feels both like a survival game and a modern take on exorcism, which appears to be resonating strongly with overseas viewers.
The critic added that the future of K-horror lies not only in jump scares, but in compelling storytelling and detailed world building. And judging by the global response so far, audiences around the world may already wish for what Korean horror has to offer next, even a season 2 for Kirigo. 박건우, Arirang News.
Clear skies have returned to most parts of the country. Temperatures will stay slightly below seasonal averages through tomorrow. But on Sunday, winds will shift from northwesterlies to warmer southwesterlies, pushing Seoul up to 25 degrees Celsius, bringing early summer-like weather. Under the clear skies, UV levels will be very high in many areas during the daytime. So it's best to limit outdoor activities, but if you're planning to head outside, be sure to put sunscreen on. Meanwhile, strong winds are expected in parts of central and southern areas and Jeju Island, and parts of Daegu and Gyeongsang-Bukdo province will remain dry. As for temperatures, Seoul will start the day at 10 degrees Celsius, Daejeon at 8 degrees, Gwangju at 6 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 22 degrees, Daejeon, Daegu, and Gyeongju will all top out at 24 degrees. Looking ahead, rain is expected on Monday across central regions, as well as parts of Jeollabukdo and Gyeongsang-Bukdo provinces.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session, and today we touch upon consumption trends. Do stay with us.
Wow. Oh, this is a bidding. 에너지 들어가 있어요. 우와. 맛봐도 돼요? 네. 와우. 와, 색깔이 조금 노란색이에요. 부드러워요. You see? Beautiful little octopus shape. Yes. Perfect. They're suck.
The moment we wear it, our spirits lift. It helps us grow strong in body and in mind. As we wear it, we learn patience and respect. The belt system motivates students to strive harder and continue growing. This uniform shapes movement into grace and turns performance into something thrilling. Now, embraced around the world, Taekwondo shares our culture, philosophy, and values with pride and spirit. Though it may seem simple, this uniform holds your passion and your journey. It belongs to Taekwondo. Wear the extraordinary. Be with Taekwondo.
A viral internet challenge appears to be regaining ground among young adults as the cost of living remains high. With more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Friday, May 8th here in Seoul. I'm Min Son-hee. The No Buy Challenge, it's the new flex in town among young adults, with spending regarded as sitting, if you will, as the cost of living continues to rise. For more on this, I have independent journalist Kelly Kasulis-Jo here in the studio. Kelly, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
I also have Stephen Borwick with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia here in the studio with us. Stephen, it's great to have you here.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
Kelly, let's begin with some context behind the No Buy Challenge among young adults worldwide, of course. How did this, or when did this challenge appear to regain greater ground among the younger demographic, and how popular is it as we speak?
Yeah, this idea of like a zero spend culture online, some people track it back to the early COVID days, or right in that kind of transitionary period out of the pandemic, so maybe like 2021, 2022. It seems to be gaining more traction right now in Korea, and in the States too. There's a lot of they don't call it zero spend in the States so much as like this de-influencing side of social media, but it's this idea where you don't need to buy something, you don't need to spend any money at all. You have everything that you need, most likely in most cases, in your home. It's like this anti-consumerist culture. And apparently it's really big right now with people in their 20s and 30s in Korea. But when I was doing research about this, I think there is like an interesting dichotomy. Like there's a lot of media reports that young people like Gen Zs are really cheap, that they don't want to spend money, they don't want to go out and drink alcohol, they don't want to go to restaurants. But on the other hand, you will see reports that they're some of the greatest luxury spenders right now. So like there's a Korean research analysis firm that said that 43% of the luxury market is actually Korean Gen Zs, so people in their 20s and early 30s. So I think there's kind of two dueling narratives going on, and this has also existed in the United States. Certainly luxury brands in the last 10, 15 years have really become something that a middle-class person wants and tends to spend money on more and more. But at the same time, we have this kind of fringe subculture on social media that is like an extreme version of frugality where you're trying to go 30 days without spending any money at all, which is a very hard thing to do. I've tried it myself, and as we were talking about off air, I only made it one day without spending any money.
Right, but one day, big deal. Stephen, with regard to the trend here in South Korea, is it being driven by rising costs or changing values, do you think?
It's probably both. I would say that it's when you look at these phenomena, like when and how they pop up, like they're generally like I think a kind of rational response to economic conditions. I would say that like if you go back to COVID, I think what COVID did is it really created something that was kind of unprecedented. It created a real like scarcity of experience. It created this scenario where like even if you had money, even if you, as you know, as people did not do things, as people could not go out, people couldn't travel, people had no reason to like buy new clothes or no reason to like buy a new car. All this, they had this money kind of building up and up and up, and then like once the travel restrictions were lifted, once life got kind of back to normal, there was this kind of pent-up demand for just being out and just having real kind of in-person shared experiences. And the COVID pandemic also just kind of made everybody appreciate those experiences, I think, in a different way. People didn't take them for granted as much anymore. What we're seeing now is distinct from that, and I think that the situation in the Middle East and a number of other factors are really kind of driving home the risk of real material scarcity. So I think that's probably why this current movement is focusing on like not buying things and like not consuming. Like this is probably the first time since the pandemic that there's been this kind of credible risk that like oil shipments may not make it to this part of the world, and then if they don't, you may not be able to, you know, a lot of these chemicals go into cosmetics and they go into plastics and they go into all these different things that people need. You know, I have to assume my local grocery store is still rationing garbage bags to 1 per customer, and the lady who last sold me one, she specified, she said, well, are you going to put your purchase in this? You know, you can't just have the bag to take with you. It has to, you know, whatever item you just bought has to be going into this bag. So I think that maybe like one positive spin from this could be that like this current phase of scarcity, nobody wants it to last forever, but like one thing that it could do is it could kind of demystify like physical spending and like the acquisition of objects and, you know, like the desire to obtain material things. Maybe people will see if they go for it without a while, they'll think, well, you know, maybe I do not need to spend, you know, 4 million won on a luxury handbag, and, you know, maybe I'm happy without that. But I think these things come and go, and, you know, I just would say that as larger scale economic conditions change, these phenomena will kind of change in response.
Right. And Kelly, what more can you tell us about the role of social media in promoting perhaps these frugal living styles?
There's a few things that I've seen out there. So in the English social media world, I get a lot of content that is like de-influencers, so people who actually make money, right, selling the idea that you need to be de-influenced. So people who are influencers professionally telling you to not listen to influencers. And so a lot of that kind of content is you know, showing products that tend to go viral on platforms like Temu or on these like online kind of like live shopping sale platforms, and showing that they don't work, or that the quality is poor, or that you already have something in your home. So you'll see a lot of like TikTok reels that will be like, you don't need a pink purse, you don't need an extra pair of shoes, right? You don't need a mason jar with a straw, things like that. So that is really kind of the trend right now in the States. In Korea, I've noticed there's like this zero spend challenge, and so it's usually people taking you through their daily life and kind of what they do to avoid spending literally a dime or a single won. There's also something called Nengpa. Have you heard of that? It's basically apparently it's a revolutionary idea, but it's the idea that you go into your freezer and you dig through it and you spend, or you eat what you already have. I think in the 80s that was called normal living, right? But it's this idea that you don't neglect what's already in your fridge, and you make dinner instead of going out to eat.
Nengpa being the 2 Korean words, Neng for 냉장고, which is refrigerator, and pa being pada as in dig into. Oh, I see.
Yeah, digging it. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, these are kind of lifestyles that are being sold to people. I, again, would like to note that there are people making money off of selling these lifestyles. And as someone I've actually tried the zero spend challenge. As I mentioned, I only made it 1 day without spending any money. But I found the mental load of like carrying all my water, all of my coffee for the day, trying to eat meals from my house in between going to different gigs and things like that quite impossible, and maybe not worth saving the 8,000 won that I would have spent on like a naengmyeon and a coffee or something, right? So I do think it's a little aspirational, this lifestyle, and probably not realistic for most people.
Right. In the meantime then, Stephen, how are businesses responding to these spending patterns or lack of spending among young adults?
I just want to say that the idea of watching someone online go a day without spending any money sounds really boring, and I'm skeptical as to how big of an audience any of these new influencers are building, but that's kind of beside the point. I would say that a lot of businesses are doing what businesses always do, and they're adapting, and they're kind of trying to meet consumer tastes where they are. I mean, in doing a bit of research, I saw some reporting in the Straits Times newspaper about that flagged how Daiso, the Korean retailer, has seen some increase in their sales revenue just because people are looking for cheaper options, and I guess Daiso's brand value has increased. There's a Daiso not far from where I live, which is in the Hongdae area, and there's constantly like lines out the door. A lot of foreign tourists who come here seem to have a Daiso on their list. I'm not exactly sure what you can get at Daiso that you can't get in the countries that they hail from, but I don't know how much of that is really new though, because having lived here for a long time, my impression of Korean folks has generally always been that Koreans like saving money, and Koreans are quite passionate in the pursuit of what in this country is called gaseongbi, like value for money. It's kind of a national sport here to be like seeking out the barbecue restaurant that has high quality meat and generous portions. Discount coffee is a massive industry here. I think there's always been the commercial mindset here has always been like very in tune with the consumer's desire to save money where they can. I would just flag that the business, even though things do seem to be changing in some ways, like the economic and business incentives are going to remain the same. That any product that's really inexpensive is going to have a low profit margin, and luxury products, higher value products, are more expensive, but the variation between like what they cost and the amount of profit that the merchant is making and selling them is a lot bigger. So I'm sure that there will be some retailers who will tweak what they're doing, or trumpet what they're doing as fitting the zeitgeist more snugly, but there's still going to be an economic incentive to create high value products, and there's not going to be a wholesale change, I don't think.
Right. In the meantime, Kelly, what have analysts been saying about the maybe impact or potential impact of such spending patterns on the social lives of the young people?
Yeah, from an optimistic perspective, I've read the take that this could encourage younger people to bond over more than food, shopping, and drink. I'm a little skeptical over whether or not that is true. I don't know if young people are like going to free art museums more because they want to save money, right? So some of it might be more like social life is driven kind of into the underground, so in homes and things like that. I mean, in the United States, so I went to university in Boston, alcohol is very expensive, and so is eating out in Boston. You're talking about maybe $18 for a beer over 10 years ago. And so what you would have instead is just a lot of people binge drinking in basement apartments, right? So there could be some kind of effect going on there. I think, like I said, it's a bit optimistic that young people are going to bond over hiking and going to art museums instead of eating out and drinking just to save a dime. With that said, it might change people to it might force people to change their social circle. You might find more like-minded people that are willing to spend less and hang out with them, or that are willing to bond over hobbies. But a lot of essays have been published about how this could encourage loneliness. People who don't want to date, who don't want to go out because they simply can't afford it. There's, for Korea specifically, been a lot of coverage about Koreans having this desire to show that they have money and to kind of save face in this way. And so there's this idea that if you can't afford to take someone out to a nice dinner, just don't go out at all. So, I'm not really sure. I do think that from what I see, I mean, young people are still going out. And to Stephen's point, these kind of like zero spend influencers, they do have a big following, but I think it's because they're selling an aspirational lifestyle rather than one that people can adopt. And I still think it's quite a fringe movement in general.
All right, keeping in mind what Kelly has just said, Stephen, then do you see this particular trend as lasting, or does it look to fade?
I alluded to this earlier. I think these things are cyclical, and I think these things are, they reflect what's happening in the economy as a whole. So I think, in times of extravagance, in times of abundance, extravagance will follow. In times of belt tightening, then frugality will follow. I think that's the way it's always been. Maybe now there's going to be a certain mass of people who will deem it to be kind of like more responsible or cooler to be not displaying wealth or to not be consuming things. But if that remains in place for a while, there will naturally emerge a movement of people who think that conspicuous displays of wealth, or, I could see maybe a movement spurring coming from the idea that all of this reducing of the spending is having deleterious economic effects. Going around the country, you see tons of empty stores, and a lot of commercial areas seem like they're hanging on by their fingernails. And so I'm not going to tell anybody how to spend their money, but I make an effort to in my neighborhood kind of walk around and patronize my local businesses and buy something from my local bakery, have a coffee in my local coffee shop, support my local grocery store, just because I want to live in a neighborhood where those businesses are doing well and can keep their doors open. So no simple answers when it comes to this kind of thing.
You're right, promoting locavourism then. I remember right after the pandemic, we spoke about revenge spending, which you alluded to earlier, and then now we're talking about no-buy challenge. On a personal level, Kelly, how would you define mindful spending?
Well, I will say this topic is very relevant to me because I feel like the last year or so I have taken a look at my spending and tried to be a bit more mindful. And I think for me, it's really thinking through a purchase. So do I have something like this already? Do I need this? Am I buying this thing at Daiso just because I can't find it in my house? Or do I actually not have it in my home, right? And just to offer some tips, I mean, there are these free wardrobe apps. So believe it or not, based on the way I'm dressed right now, one of my weaknesses with shopping is clothes. I love buying clothes and shoes. And so there are apps where you can actually archive your wardrobe. So if you're out shopping, you can kind of pull it up and remember what you already have so that you're not buying another white t-shirt, or kind of you can mix and match outfits. And it kind of feels like you're online shopping in your own closet as well. So it's a good way to remind you that you don't need a 76 pair of sneakers just because it's a different color, right? And then on top of that, I have been taking advantage of the coupon deals that I get with my phone carrier and things like that, but also not letting those incentivize me to buy something that I wouldn't have bought already. And just remembering that you don't have to spend money every time you step out of the house simply because you stepped out of the house, right? But I will say sustainability and climate change often fuels a lot of this conversation. I don't know if that is as effective to the average person as just kind of the selfish desire to save money where you can. And so if you find that you get a dopamine hit shopping for clothes, maybe there's a way you can archive your clothes where it feels like you're shopping for your clothes when you're just picking out an outfit.
All right, Stephen, same question. What strategies do you recommend to ensure responsible spending?
One of my New Year's resolutions was to spend less. I don't spend all that much. I like buying clothes. I like buying books, but I'm not a huge consumerist kind of person. I guess I'm something of a minimalist. I don't like owning a lot. I can't stand being in a cluttered space. I get the dopamine hit that Kelly was just referring to of that she might or somebody else might get from buying a new article of clothing. I get that from throwing out something. If I see something in my house that nobody is using, and I throw that away, and then the next time I look at that space, I just see emptiness. I get a dopamine hit from that. But
I understand that.
The way that I'm not a super skilled manager of money or anything, but I was raised very much. For immigrant household, I was raised very much with the concept of spending, always being the emphasis, the idea don't spend money today so that you have that money in the future. And I do see the wisdom of that, but like I always felt like throughout my adult life, like I've lived a like reasonable balance of like enjoying myself in the present moment and like doing things that make me happy, like going out with my friends or taking trips or whatever it is, but not being excessive, you know, always making sure that like I have a kind of reserve amount of money that's there in case of emergencies. And you know, my wife and I bought a house last year, so that was a major milestone, and I couldn't have done that unless I was saving at least a fair amount of my income. So that's basically it. I don't have a ton of practicable steps there. I will certainly not be a spending influencer or any other kind of influencer anytime soon, because I've just said basically everything that I can share about financial planning.
Right. Kelly, if I were to ask you perhaps to identify a consumption tendency that is uniquely Korean, what would you choose to highlight?
Well, when I first moved here almost 10 years ago, I was really shocked at kind of the consumer culture around food trends. And I think some of that is actually spreading to the United States now. So it's not uniquely Korean anymore, but it was to me 10 years ago. When I was young, it was the honey butter chip. This was like a scarce thing that was impossible to get, and when you got it, you paid a premium for it, and you shared it only with your best friend, right? It was kind of like the labubu of food. And I think we've seen with like the Dubai chewy cookie, the dujongku craze, how wild this can get. People lining up for hours to get one cookie, pistachios going for 100,000 won a kilogram, restaurants having to take it off the menu, countries being low in supply because they're exporting so many pistachios. So that's kind of the extreme version of this. Right now it's like, or is it passé already? Like butter tteok is like the thing. Yeah, and I mean, I will say the one thing I enjoyed about this was sometimes it can be a seasonal thing. So like when it's mango season, you see mango bingsu everywhere. You see these strawberry buffets at peak strawberry season. So that could be like potentially nice and sustainable, right? But I think what we're seeing more and more is that you're importing crops from other countries to the point where they have a deficit and the locals can't even enjoy it. So I think right now we're having an ube moment. I think the US had it first, and now it's hitting Korea, and I'm seeing ube lattes and ube cheesecake everywhere, right? And it's been reported in the New York Times that the Philippines has like a shortage, and they're not able to enjoy their own cuisine because of it. So that is something that I've noticed here that is spreading very quickly to the West. And it's probably because of TikTok and social media. I'll mention two more. This Greek yogurt with the lotus cookie trend, or the coconut Korean biscuits, that was a thing. And then the frozen jelly candies where you freeze them and then they become crunchy. Anyway, there's a lot of that. And it does make me wonder if it's like secret native advertising or something, but that is something that is very Korea coded to me.
Right. What about you, Stephen? Based on your observations here, what appears to be uniquely Korean spending style?
I hope this doesn't sound flippant, but I want to say saving all your money for real estate and children's education seems to be like a kind of unique Korean style of money management. Like whenever I write about the Korean economy, like something that always comes back to is Korea has hit this point where it is a high income country, but it is still very reliant on exports because the level of domestic consumption is still fairly low. Like there's just not enough spending at home to sustain, you know, a lot of high income jobs here. And I have to assume that, you know, like I said, I bought a house recently, and like my wife and I like orienting our budget so that a huge portion of our income goes to our mortgage. And then our daughter just started school, and like the idea is that we cut spending on everything else and put all of our money towards these two things, the place that we live in and the child we're raising. That was this very sobering moment for me, because it was a moment when I realized that the dynamics of the society that I've lived in for so long, that I always wrote about as a kind of detached observer, had really become my own life. So I try not to get too depressed about it, but
yeah. But congratulations on owning your home now.
That's thank you. That's you know,
a big milestone.
That is something to be happy about. We can get into that more another time, perhaps. It's a complicated picture, but my colleague wrote an interesting story recently about Korea's inheritance tax and like how it's quite high, and like some households are taking measures to avoid it. And one bit of it that stuck out to me is a kind of wealth manager was quoted and he said that when most Korean people reach retirement age, their portfolio is very simple. They have their house and they have some cash. They don't have what investment advisors would call a diverse portfolio. So that seems to be a kind of, it's not, of course, not unique to Korea, but like that seems to be like kind of the Korean convention. So as the society ages and as the Korean government like confronts a lot more questions about like how to deal with that, how to deal with like the waning national pension, that's probably a worthwhile lesson that hopefully more people will follow through on, like as they get older, putting their money in different sources and finding different areas of growth. And the stock market is doing really well now, so maybe that's one option.
Indeed, and a topic to be discussed in another session, of course. All right, Stephen, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Kelly, thank you very much for your insights.
Thanks.
Right, that ends this week's editions of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. See you same time next Monday. Have a great weekend.
The moment we wear it, our spirits lift. It helps us grow strong in body and in mind. As we wear it, we learn patience and respect. The belt system motivates students to strive harder and continue growing.